Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Claudio and I'm welcoming you to a new Sound Money, Sound Society podcast coming from Switzerland directly. Today I have the pleasure to talk to an old friend of mine, Frank Suess, founding partner and chairman of BFI Capital Group. Frank and his team published a report about the ongoing implications of the corona crisis. I think the title says a lot. It's on the brink of a new era. Are you prepared? I think the world has changed. A lot of people have already understand that. And of course, with these changes and the interference by governments in the private life and private businesses of people have a tremendous impact. And therefore, the report aims to how to prepare, what can you do as an individual investor to protect your wealth in these uncertain times. So I would like to welcome Frank to this conversation. So Frank, pleasure to have you for this interview. Thank you very much for taking time.
Well, thank you, Claudio. It's a pleasure and I'm honored. It's great to have this interview with you, and like you said, I think it's an important time to have this conversation. There's a lot going on, and yeah, we did write this report. It was quite a process. We're not a publishing firm, so next to actually managing assets and helping our clients protect and grow their wealth, doing something like this is a lot of work, but we felt it was really important. There's so many variables and factors and so much noise out in the media that it is important to kind of, try to structure things so that you can have a good overview and understand what's going on.
Okay, so Frank, could you please elaborate a bit on the structure of the report? Because it's quite a booklet. So just to give an overview to the future readers.
So I'm usually not a fan of writing this much. I generally always tell everyone, just put it in bullet points, get to the key points. But here we did write a bit more. So the report really is structured kind of in four parts. If you look at the table of contents, we start off with the topic and the title. The big title is A Difficult and Uncertain Recovery. So basically, we are in the midst of this coronavirus crisis, and we look at, for example, the question of, are we going to have a V-shaped recovery, or is it going to be more of a K-shaped recovery, and so on. And one of the things we say in that part is that, there have been some pre-existing trends which existed long before COVID. The second bigger part or chapter is facing the consequences of excessive debt. Mm-hmm. And really ultimately, what you're seeing today is that, the deficits and the debt levels are going even higher than we would have ever imagined, and there's no end in sight. And the question is, what will the unfolding of that debt be? And then we go into the wealth management implications, and there we discuss actually those two aspects, the aspect of structure versus the aspect of investing. So in terms of asset allocation, investment strategy, what might be the right strategy? How are we investing assets at this point? What kind of risk management do we have in place there? And the other part is structure. We also, within that section, we talk quite a bit about US specific risks because a lot of our clients are Americans. We also talk obviously about the presidential election, and we might touch on that a bit later, but there it's, for us, it's not so much about Biden or Trump. You're really looking at more fundamental issues there, and in a way, we think you're choosing two very different policies potentially, and what we're questioning here. One thing we'll have to see is if Biden is elected, to what degree we would have, maybe he will have exposure, and maybe the Democratic Party would be led down the road of those more extreme Democrats. The Democrats in the past, moderate liberals. Are very different from what you see now in the Democratic Party sometimes. And what would that mean for America, and what would that mean for the world?
So, to me, of course, I'm a big gold fan. I'm the hardcore guy. You know me. I truly believe, we can hear, all those videos of the World Economic Forum talking about the Great Reset, the fourth industrial revolution. So we don't know if this will be the future, but at least it's promoted on the official channels. And we don't know yet, how long this corona.
You're talking about the manifesto now, or that they wrote at the WEF, or what do you mean?
Well, they basically came out in June this year with a podcast about the Great Reset. You will find it on the World Economic Forum page. Okay. So it's Klaus Schwab, Prince Charles, Guterres from the United Nations, the head of the International Monetary Fund. And they're basically talking about, we have to reboost the system. We go into a CO2 emission-free, green, this is the opportunity to establish now this kind of new economy. And then the fourth industrial revolution is even more involving medical, this transhumanism, so that you can really, inject GPRSs, you can inject, nanoparticles into the human body, basically to find out if they, the way they are selling it, it helps, for diseases and so on. I mean, that's, it's not invented by me. I mean, it's basically what the people can find on the internet. So to me, I'm a bit, I think what's coming, because, this, at the beginning they were saying, 14 days flattening the curve. Now I think we are, 6-7 months into a partial lockdown of the global economy. I mean, we know certain countries are still completely locked down, and we don't know how long it lasts. So it can last until the next year, and then the question, of course, is always what will be left of the global economy. And then, of course, when governments have the power to give everything, they also have the power to take everything. So I think it's important for other jurisdictions, really to trying to find a safe hub. And we both, of course, have always promoted Switzerland as a good jurisdiction with a historical track record of protecting private property. Also, I think because of the structures, heavily decentralized or non-centralized, the principle of subsidiarity, a weak government, which was not interfering into human lives at all the time. So I think that's a good basis, also for the future.
So, you're touching on a few different subjects there, and some of them we didn't, we didn't talk about the chip and the new, the Great Reset in the report. I'm actually not familiar. I'm familiar with that manifesto that they wrote, which they even titled that way, which has a bit of a, reminds of another time. Yeah, I mean, the title may be implicating certain ideas they have. I'm not sure. But one area that we talk about is social unrest and the strange return of Marxism. Yeah. So that's one of the trends that existed before coronavirus hit. And is it okay if I just read this? Sure. Because actually I could probably say it better if I read it than if I go free solo. Okay. So so social unrest and the strange return of Marxism. No matter where you stand politically and ideologically, it is hard to ignore the growing social unrest and strange battlegrounds of our times. And you kind of went to some of those. Just when we thought we had done away with communism and had sufficiently proven that the Marxist model of society was dysfunctional and destructive, the same old ideas, based in collectivist hatred and envy, seem to be back in full force. During the last century, from Mao, Lenin, and Stalin to Mussolini and Hitler, the grand ideas of collectivists and centralist regimes, built on the foundation of tribal instincts, conformist censorship, and utopian egalitarianism, cost more than 100 million human lives. Yeah. The democracies of countries like America and Switzerland, founded on constitutions that respect the inalienable rights and the sovereignty of each individual, irrespective of their race, class, religion, age, or sex, have flourished and progressed far more successfully. And yet, these flawed ideas are back, undermining Western cohesion, values, and culture. And we go on that a bit more, but basically, you mentioned that we like Switzerland. I'm also a great fan of America. It's obviously America and Switzerland too. We have things that are not perfect. But one of the things that I love about these countries is our constitution. The foundation of the success we've had, and it's interesting, a lot of people don't realize that, but the Constitution of Switzerland was in large parts was very strongly influenced and to some degree copied some of the U.S. Constitutional, also the Bill of Rights, are very much reflected in the Constitution of Switzerland. And if you look at the Constitution of Switzerland and the U.S., what's special about it is, and I think there you have already, you kind of see where like the Constitution of Switzerland and the U.S. compared to maybe more socialistic or even Marxist regimes. What's the big difference? I mean, if you look at the, at the range, you're looking here a lot of government, very autocratic, and everything centralist, planned economy oriented. Whereas over here we have more free market. But the core thing, which is so beautiful about our constitutions, the US and the Swiss constitution, is that you have that sovereign individual as the basis. And the sovereign individual, what does that mean? It's basically a human being with all his aspects and variables, with all of his attributes, is a free person. And diversity is in that, right? So if you're a sovereign individual, each individual is different. And while the left is preaching diversity, our Constitution actually defends and builds on the basis of diversity. And the problem with socialism is that although they talk about diversity, they want these very diverse human beings all to be same at the end. They're looking at equal outcome. So that's a huge contradiction. And I think conservatives and those of us who love our Constitution and freedom recognize that that is a contradiction that will never be resolved. If you want to give each individual the possibility to grow and be himself and be the best he can be, and be diverse and different in whichever, be it race, sex, or whatever, well, then you cannot have a system that forces equal outcome. The best we can do is we can try to provide for a foundation and for a framework that allows them to freely evolve and flourish. And that's for me the big difference. And what's interesting, and that's what we discuss in here a bit as one of the trends, is you look at some of these trends, especially in the US, but also in Europe. So much is about identity politics. So much is about creating, these fractions and tribes. You have, starting with female versus male, then you have the whole transgender movement. And I think our Constitution is not against that at all. And you and I, we both, when we're dealing personally with people that are different, we'll be respectful and hopefully as loving as possible. But what we're seeing now is it's going further than that. It's more like a divisiveness, and we're trying to play these groups against each other. And that is now, in the US at least, finding its way into politics at a scale which is a bit concerning.
I fully agree. I think the Swiss understood, that the smallest minority worth to protect is the individual himself. And the other stuff is this identity politics, which really has been heavily promoted. I think this is, Marxism also had a kind of form when it comes to dialectic, and there was always, the dialectic materialism, so basic problem, reaction, solution. And that's the way that I see it, when you have this, you basically lead the people to fight, the whites against the blacks, the Catholics versus the non-believers, whatever. You always create those political entities, and I think, that's what we don't have that much also over here in Switzerland, when I compare it with other nations. No, I think, what we can agree on is definitely, we don't know how the next 6, 12, or 18 months look like. At the end of the day, nobody knows. I think so many things have happened over the last. If you would have told somebody in January that they can lock down the whole global economy, everyone would have laughable. It's not possible. And
so I disagree with you on that, Claudio. I know what you mean. Yeah, I disagree. I think one of the good things about our current situation is that looking out 6 to 12 months. Or maybe even 24 months, the probability of what will happen is quite high. I think we have relatively good visibility in terms of, so actually we kind of unravel that in the report. We kind of look at The fact is we'll have more debt, for example, right? We'll have more deficits. Spending, there will be more interventionism of central banks and governments, for sure. That's the only weapon we have at this point. Interest rates will not go much lower, right? We're kind of at a we're kind of at a dead end there too. The stock markets, based on the liquidity being instilled, actually could keep going up. You know, right now you have both fiscal and monetary stimulus, which will continue, which means that stock markets will benefit from that. And in general, I think real assets will benefit from that. We have an asset class that is not that attractive anymore, which is fixed income bonds. So I mean, and I could go on. There's some things which actually are quite certain. Yeah. And you have to, I think, as in any risk management analysis or investing, or as in life, you will never have all the information you need. But I think we have enough information to take some decisions and you know, prepare for what's ahead. And all of this means that, you know, ultimately we'll have to deal with public debt at levels that you will not be able to remove with growth. Yeah. Obviously, especially advanced economies will do everything they can to not default. I think we may see some more defaults in third world countries and less developed countries. You know, they're more exposed. But what you will see for sure is you know, and then obviously one thing that you could do is tighten your belt, right? You could austerity. Yeah. That's not going to happen. I mean, at least not in our world. No politician thinks that's a good idea these days if he wants to be reelected. So what are you left with really to reduce debt and deal with that? It's financial repression and inflation. At some point, the big risk of this debt and of where we are today is what happens when yields start moving up? What happens when mortgages start moving up? You know, if you have a mortgage contract where you're paying 0.5% or 1%, you know, in Switzerland some of the variable ones are very, very, very low. If you suddenly have mortgage rates going up to 1% to 2%, you know, from 1% to 2%, that's a doubling of your bill. And the big threat we're looking at this point is the huge reserves of fixed income in pension funds, in insurance companies, in, you know, treasuries. The loss of value and the destruction of wealth once interest rates start going up is going to be huge. Now they're going to fight interest rates going up tooth and nail. When I say they, that's governments and central banks. But at some point the question becomes, you know, how long are they actually in control of that? And history shows that sometimes inflation and or interest rates can move up by market forces, and that can happen quite rapidly. So that is one of the unknowns that we have to prepare for too, and that makes investing interesting.
I think it's important. The point is really, you know, that you held certain assets outside the banking system in physical precious metals or even base metals. I think it makes sense because we are in a deflationary environment when it comes to goods and services, and in an inflationary environment when it comes to injection by central banks.
I think that's important to understand that gold has performed well the past few years and has been really the most attractive when it comes to capital gains, one of the most attractive asset classes. Why is that? It doesn't have to do with inflation or deflation. It has to do with the fact that people, you know, have a level of distrust and a level of concern, and there's risks, and there's the realization that, you know, this game of printing money into you know, in amounts which are just not realistic anymore, or could be risky. It's a hedge. It's an insurance against the imbalances and the impact that can have. So gold, interestingly, I think has been doing well, and has really taken on, or has become once again, an asset class of its own.
I mean, maybe, yeah. I mean, gold during deflation, I think deflation always means a flight into quality, into safety as well. That's why I think gold is performing also in an inflation and also deflationary scenario. Yeah. So I think that's definitely a must-have. And I think, yeah, the strategy that you go with BFI, wealth management, I think that also makes sense because we never know what's coming, so therefore you cannot put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, I mean, I've told you that before. I really think that investing ideologically is not a good idea. You know, I think it's important that when you invest, you kind of keep that part. I mean, you have to be somewhat dry in your analysis and really look at the facts. And a lot has to do with capital flows. I mean, there's so many things that go into that. And again, I think really investing has a lot to do, investing successfully, especially also as a professional firm, has a lot to do with the investment process. You know, making sure that there's an engine behind that makes sure that the analysis and the risk management and the investment decisions are done in a systematic way. But coming back to, you know, we did write a bit here. We do talk, one chapter is called Headed for the Fourth Turning.
Yeah, okay.
And
it's
exactly. So Neil Howe and William Strauss, they wrote this book, and we put this in here. I read that book in I think towards the end of the 90s. I think it was, and I think it was written in 97, if I'm correct. And back then when I read the book, I thought, they're a bit too negative. You know, this is a bit very gloomy. And you know, I can, you know, if I read from the report, one of the quotes that we have in there, they kind of predict, you know, I mean, if those who haven't read the book, basically to sum it up, what William Strauss and Neil Howe do is they talk about the cycles. Mm-hmm. They talk about four turnings, which basically, in a way, are very closely aligned time-wise with four generations. Mm-hmm. So, you know, your grandparents and my grandparents, that generation, you know, which lived partially during the Second World War and maybe after, and our parents, you know, that were part of the rebuilding after the Second World War. Then we were born. I mean, we were kind of spoiled. If you look at our phase, you know, things were quite nice, and we've had a relatively easy life. Mm-hmm. And then you have the fourth generation, you know, which now I guess are Generation X and millennials, I guess. The psyche of those societies, of those generations, changes over time. And as wealth is built and prosperity grows, and as the level of, you know, need for resilience and strength and dealing with real problems goes away, the more, you know, issues and social unrest are created. And they kind of, I summed it up here in one quote from William Strauss. First comes a high, a period of confident expansion as a new order takes root after the old has been swept away. The psyche of society is full of optimism, fortitude, and resilience. Society is in a rebuilding mode. Next comes an awakening, a time of spiritual exploration and rebellion, the 60s, I guess, against the new established order. Then comes an unraveling, an increasingly troubled era in which individualism triumphs over crumbling institutions. Last comes a crisis, the fourth turning, when society goes through a painful and perilous stage in its history. Together, these four turnings comprise history's seasonal rhythm of growth, maturation, entropy, and rebirth. It really, I mean, and when you know, if you listen to this, you kind of look at where we are today, and you look out there, and part of you becomes somewhat fatalistic because you kind of go, okay, well, that's the cycle we're in. What can we do? And it's a bit eerie when you read that book, or back, you know, you now go back to the book and you see that, you know, a lot of the predictions and some of the things that they said would happen, you see them unfolding. It is a bit eerie, and we are coming towards the end of that fourth turning. So, you know, how long things will take to unravel and get bad. I'm hoping that it's a longer period of time, but maybe you're right. Maybe it's sooner than we think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, everything is operating on cycles. I think we have a life cycle, traffic cycles. You know, we have long-term debt cycles, 50 years even mentioned. You know, in the Bible, Jubilee and so on. And I also use those. I find these cycles extremely important and interesting as well, because even when we go back, you know, 80 years from now, we end up in the 40s. And I think First and Second World War, they go together. I mean, that's the same. And then, of course, you go back another 80 years, then that's the Civil War in the United States, but also the war we had in Europe.
Yeah, in that book they actually go back.
And then basically 80 years back, then you are in the War of Independence. So I mean, you have those 80 years implications. And then maybe also what they indicated is, the last generation is ripping off everything apart. So we could also say, the de-illusion, the house that we are witnessing. I mean, in certain nations definitely more than in others. But I think, the young guys who truly believe, that the world goes down in 7 or 12 years because of man-made CO2. I think, this kind of indoctrination, which really comes, from more, from the university side and so on, I think that's heavily toxic. And so we would have, I mean, everything is prepared basically to even fulfill, another 80-year cycle. Okay. So I think, the aim was really to introduce the people to the report and to give them also a kind of overview with, who Frank Suess is and, what you're doing as a group. I hope this will, I hope that the people will appreciate that you learned some stuff, and I can only suggest download the report. It's really good stuff in there, and it can act as a kind of candle in the night. And if you have questions or you're interested in the services of BFI, I mean, feel free, shoot them an email. I think they're more than willing, to answer your questions, and even if they cannot help you, that they would point you out to the right direction. But I think, time to act, time to think, and I thank you very much for participating and watching the video. And Frank, thank you so much for having me and for the good conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll probably continue after the video.
Absolutely.